All right, it's July 9th, and this is the Groups and Projects Working Group. So Alex, I'll let you kick it off since you have the first one. I actually have a little preamble. I extended this session. Mike reached out to me and thought it might be useful to spend some of the time together, sort of sketching and digging into some of that solution validation. So y'all can drop when we get to that point if you have other things. But since we're all here, it might be nice to do that together. So I'll let Mike lead that part, but we can start with the top of the agenda. So Alex, you're up.
Sure. Yeah, it's pretty much what it says there in the meeting notes. I just haven't had enough time this week, but I hope to look at what Gitlab maybe look like if we were to start from scratch. But yeah, I'll have that for next week, hopefully.
Great. In that case, Mike, main event.
Yeah, that was quick. Cool. Some of you have already been in an inception before. I'm going to run us through kind of a lightning inception because, yeah, the main purpose is to propose solution ideas and to discuss each one, the value of it, the merits of a solution, and then we're going to do it on a mural board so we have kind of a better like visual representation of our what we talked about the last few weeks. I think it can be easier to look at a mural board and go, okay, this is where we're headed for in terms of a decision than to try to do the long scroll through a Google Doc. And it's honestly just like easier to follow when it's more visual. So I put an invite link into the doc here. If that invite link doesn't work, please do chime in. I see Gabe, Justin, and myself so far.
I'm just signing up. I don't have an account yet. So just a minute.
Okay, apologies for that. Yeah, it looks like we have a really good representation of engineering, UX, and PM. Well, I don't know if the representation for UX is that good, but I'm here.
Now it says the privacy settings for this mural have changed. I don't have permission. And
okay, let me fix that. Privacy settings. What's your, can you put your email address in the Zoom chat for me, please?
Sure.
Did anyone else run into that error?
Yeah, I've just shared my email address as well.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm a little late. What are we looking at here in Mural? Are we getting signed in or?
Yeah, we're getting signed in.
Signed in, okay.
It's the link, Kristen, on the
Yeah,
agenda if you don't have it.
Okay.
I thought I already had Mural.
Liam and Marcus, I imagine you'll get an email shortly, or you could just try refreshing. If you signed in with your GitLab email address, you might be able to refresh and see it.
Yeah.
Ah, Liam, I see Liam. I feel like one of those like children's television show hosts. I see Liam, and I see Justin, and I see Kristen, and like it's just it's just some lady in a studio staring into a camera, saying popular names for that era. Okay. We have 6 people in the mural, and Melissa, are you in there? In the mural?
No, I just joined. Can you send the link again, please?
Yeah, please send your email address in the Slack. So just copy paste it. I'm really good at typos. And Melissa, your email address is mushakov, right? Mushakov, M-U-S-H-A-K-O-V. Oh, you're already a member. Were you able to, when you open the link, Melissa, were you able to see the mural? You should
Oh, it's in
readily
the
have.
agenda that I.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. It's in the agenda.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Just
It's
pasted
okay.
it in the chat too, in case.
All good. I mean, it's 6:30 on the West Coast, so I'm like, whew, I might be dreaming.
Doing great.
Thanks.
We got an early morning tomorrow morning too.
Yeah, what time?
7 tomorrow. But
That's pretty rough if you're not used to it. Yeah.
luckily I have
It's
little
not
kids.
working. I'm not
Oh,
sure
what is
why
it?
I'm not able to log in. Like I've used Okta. It's
Uh-oh.
usually
Well, it says you're already a member when I add you as a, yeah, when I put your email address in, it says you're already a member. So that's weird. How did other folks log in? Did you use Okta or just straight Google?
I just clicked the link and it asked me to sign up, so I entered my email address and got a mail.
Okay.
Same.
So neither Google or no Okta.
Okay. I'm trying to figure out how I can just open this up to anybody.
Yeah, Kristen, it
Anyone
says
with
you're in
the,
it, but not online.
weird.
oh, okay. Yeah, I see.
Maybe, Mike, you could just share your screen and we could.
Yeah, sorry about that, Melissa. I think given that your icon is in there, I think if you refresh, you might be good. It's weird. In just a second, I'm going to change the access settings.
I want to know how Mural was built. I was looking
Yeah.
at collaborative descriptions in Gitlab the other day. So
Collaborative descriptions.
yeah, like the technology, like how it works, so like collaborative document editing. So with like OT operational transforms or conflict-free replicated data types. Slight tangent, but and now that we're here, I'm interested in how they went about it.
Yeah.
I think it's all magic.
Yeah. Don't worry, Gabe. It's just magic.
It started as a game development company before they built Mural. So,
That's funny.
Yeah,
That was the
kinda.
Flickr story too.
and Slack.
And Slack, yeah.
Oh my gosh. Like, wait, we need to make money. Ah, okay. So again, like this will kind of be a lightning round. For some of the folks that were in the board's inception, you might be nervous that this is going to take a while, but I'm actually just I'm going to take some liberty here. And if I type anything wrong, you can actually just change it or duplicate it and change it if you don't feel comfortable stomping on me. But I'm going to kind of go through these pretty quickly and probably in kind of an analog way, because going linear is a bit longer. Where we really want to end up are the activities and workflows. And that's where I'll ask for people just to put note cards in the activities and workflows area where it's just a solution idea. Like it could be 1 to 10 words, and then we'll discuss. But first, let's try to slog through this really quick. I believe our goal in Vision is to simplify groups and projects. If anyone has other ideas, go ahead and duplicate it and change it. I think what I might need help with is maybe some of the non-goals. So we'll come back to that. If anyone has any ideas about a non-goal, go ahead and just start typing in one of these boxes or one of these note cards. And then I'm going to fly over to risks. I'm going to, I think, also leave that open for people who have an idea about what a risk might be. And then, and don't feel like you have to keep up. If you have an idea for a risk or a non-goal or a goal, just go for it. So again, we kind of want to rush through this part. And there might be notes from a previous meeting that might jog your memory in our agenda doc. Okay. So looks like we have some goals that are popping up. And I was wondering if, Melissa, you could maybe say out loud the one that you just wrote.
Yeah, so I wrote down a model that's easier for customers to understand. I know it's very high level, but in talking to solutions architects, basically they have told me that they spend a considerable amount of time basically explaining how things work and all the nuances of groups versus projects and sharing versus members and different roles, right? Like they spend a lot of time explaining that to people because it's not immediately intuitive. So I think an important part of this is just whatever we build 80-20 rules, somebody gets it easily.
Cool. And that your goal is informed by some conversations you've had with solution architects, and that's kind of their desire. Cool.
Yeah,
well,
and also just like if you look at our solution, it's not really like other things in the market, right? Which I think leads to people not understanding it immediately.
Okay.
I spend 5 to 10 minutes of every demo that I give to prospects on explaining groups and projects before I can show any of the features, just so they understand how things like roll up and how we end up with some of the like how you work on issues and how epics work and all that other stuff. Just explaining like the groups and projects and not the features themselves. So I can echo that.
Okay. All right. Keep code base maintainable. Who'd like to voice that one?
Yeah, I added that. Maybe this is more of a risk. Like if you don't do this, the code base will become less maintainable. But yeah, like just generally, like every time we duplicate something, it's just adds to the overhead. Makes everything more complex.
Okay.
Yeah, a slightly different version of that is that from the product side, every time we introduce a new feature, we're like, is this at the project level, at the group level, at the instance level? And that's like a whole conversation that if things were easier, like that wouldn't be a conversation, right? It would just be obvious.
Okay. I think, Justin, are you capturing the risk that
yeah, I was
that
just
Marcus identified?
trying to articulate a couple risks that I thought of from
Cool.
from Marcus's comment.
Cool. Who else would like to voice one of the goals that they wrote?
I wrote one that was make GitLab's organizational structures more extensible to support the variety of how orgs structure things. Like right now, we really only support mono repos or projects where all the project management happens inside the same project where the code base lives, and that's not the reality of how organizations structure their teams and their code. And so it leads to things that are confusing and hacky and workarounds and all that.
Okay. Anyone else want to voice a goal before we move to non-goals?
I added make already existing features work in new context, which is pretty similar to the other crowds, but it's like for example, we have a wiki feature, but some customers can't use it because it doesn't make sense for them if it's at the project level.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's, I recall that coming up pretty frequently in past conversations in this group. What are some of the risks? Who wants to voice a risk? I'm sorry, a non-goal.
I put that first one, and we can debate this one, but I put it as a non-goal to figure out a solution and a path that allows us to migrate all existing customers and namespaces to that new model. It's obviously something that needs to happen eventually, but for the first MVC, I thought we should make it a non-goal.
Can you tell us a bit more about that?
I guess, and I would defer to our engineering counterparts here to tell me if I'm overthinking this, but the idea being that it might be cleaner to scope this to, hey, for a new self-managed, instance of GitLab, let's, pursue this new model and create a version of it that works, that meets all the goals, versus understanding I'm assuming numerous upgrade paths and migration paths that would have to exist to support .com and to support large existing namespaces.
Okay.
As an MVC, obviously, this adds no value if we can't move existing customers over or GitLab.com.
Well, I agree. It depends on, we don't know what the MVC is yet.
Fair.
But I also would think that one of the, maybe this is a goal or an outcome, is it has to be something that can be incrementally, like a path to iteratively move our existing functionality. Because what we don't want to do is what Jared did with NextGen, where they have they branched their code bases between self-managed and cloud, which was a big mistake, and they're paying for it. And then they branched their code base again between NextGen and Classic, and it makes it even more confusing. So I think we should avoid branching anything
Mm-hmm. So
when
maybe
we deliver it to customers.
Yeah, I agree. So maybe this is more of a goal, which is what you stated, which is we do this in a way that allows us to incrementally move towards a solution that allows us to migrate everyone.
I think a non-goal would be having it all done.
Yeah. Yeah, let's do that. I'll change the non-goal.
Getting everything done. It's always good. Or setting a realistic goalpost that we can achieve.
Yeah, I'm gonna put that under a goal. It's a good one. Let's get real. I love that book, by the way, Getting Real. A realistic goalpost. Yep. All right, I'm gonna keep moving unless anyone wants to write or voice another non-goal.
I just had one that was fixing individual features. I don't think this exercise should look at how do issues work? Like, do the customers like issues, or do the customers like CI/CD? I think treating everything as like sort of generic, so that we don't like category teams and groups can work on making their features lovable, and I don't think we should worry about that.
Okay.
Do we need a non-goal around like getting buy-in from GitLab too, from the rest of GitLab? Or is that just implied with non-consensus as a value?
We can make it a goal. This is part of the reason why we're a working group and not a single stage,
Yeah.
a single product group, right? Thinking about this.
Can you say that out loud one more time, Kristen?
Getting the rest of GitLab onboarded and excited about it, the rest of the organization on the same page with us, I guess. Because this is complex, we're going to figure it out, but everyone else will need to get up to speed with us and also be excited about it.
Okay. Yeah, that is one of the purposes of the working group, like Justin said. I think being open and inclusive in our decision-making process is always good. It's going to be messy, but sometimes people just like to have a voice and be heard, and that's it.
And also, I guess will generate a lot of work for other teams, like the Geo team.
That's true.
Is that a goal or a non-goal, Marcus?
It's a goal to like get them comfortable with the idea, so they see like the opportunities in it.
Yep, get them excited. Boy, let's go to risks. Who would like to voice the changes touch a broad swath?
This was me reacting to one of Marcus's comments when he said the code base will become less maintainable. Thinking about it and thinking about Alex's presentation from a few weeks back, it touches a lot of things, and so it's going to affect a lot of existing functionality in the application.
Okay. Analysis paralysis.
That's me. Like, I know this is a really big change, right? And there's like a bajillion edge cases and things to consider, right? So I just worry that we're just gonna like focus on all of those things, right? Which I think we should think through all of them, right? But I guess not forget to try to act on things.
Okay, here's the fun part. Do you think analysis paralysis, so many edge cases to consider, is that kind of in conflict with that our non-goal is that we're not going to fix individual features?
I think because this is something so general, right? Like, how do you structure things, right? Essentially is what we're saying, right? Like, how do you create hierarchies within GitLab? And what tools do we give you to do that? There's a lot of different ways people want to create hierarchies, right? Some of them are in the 80%, some of them are in the 20%. And I think if we try to solve for like a straightforward, easy, I'll call it, right, like way that people may organize things, maybe that's a good way to avoid something like this. But I realize that by doing that, we may build something that doesn't meet the more complex scenarios. So
okay,
I think that's just something to be mindful of.
Okay. Who wants to voice the executing on this?
Teams buying in, because it will require everyone to make changes, or like we have groups and projects and we have namespaces, endpoints, and like APIs that teams are building, and
Okay. And then I think we talked about confusing existing users who are used to the current model. Anyone else have a risk to voice before we move to a bit of a conversation about which persona we're targeting? How about Donald or, let's see, who haven't we heard from yet? Is Donald still on here? I can't see everybody. There we go. Donald or Alex, do you have any, or Liam? Any ideas for risks around this?
I don't have any additional ones. Sorry, I'm kind of in listen mode because I have to hop in 3 minutes.
It's all good. Okay.
Nothing additional from me.
Okay.
I think I'll add one and I can type it. There's probably a risk in how we think about tackling this work and sequencing it. If it's something that requires a lot of hands to jump in and work on it across teams, that it sounds to me like it would be much harder to schedule and prioritize than if we can find ways to incrementally iterate against it. So there's a risk there that the solution we come up with necessitates a working group like level of effort from multiple engineering teams to work on it simultaneously. And that's a high chance that it doesn't happen because of that.
Will we have working group engineers work on potentially doing some of these steps, or will they all involve going out to teams?
I think we have to figure out what our solution is, but
Okay.
my imagination is that the engineers that are part of this working group are the ones who have designed the solution and sort of found the patterns. And then eventually there will be a bunch of work that individual teams will need to go follow through on, but they're not inventing the work themselves. Hopefully we've done our job in defining those patterns and defining the actual solution. So it's clear if we do need to ask a team to go make changes to their features or what have you.
And I'm assuming that somebody put all personas.
That was me. Sorry.
I agree.
As a secondary, but
yeah. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that it sounds like a system administrator's job is on the hook for this working. Anyone want to debate that? Or not debate it, that's kind of combative, but anyone have other opinions about which persona's job is on the line if this doesn't work well, or whose job is currently on the line because it's very confusing? Who do we hear the most complaints from and consternation from because of the way it currently works?
I think is the way I think about this from my perspective is when there is more stage adoption, this problem becomes much worse, which is why I put all personas with a smiley face. Because as you try and traverse, plan and create and secure and all these different pieces of functionality in the application, it becomes harder to manage that in your head and understand the relationships between resources and namespaces. Whereas if, say, you're only using create, like you're only using source code management, then this problem is less, it's still a problem, but it's less of a problem. So that was the crux of my comment there.
Yeah, I see it as like, because of the current constraints, some personas have to make trade-offs about their ideal workflow and not being able to ever attain it within GitLab because of the constraints, if that makes sense. Whether like you choose to structure your groups and projects in a way that it optimizes for project management or team planning and that sort of thing, you have to make trade-offs on where your repos are stored. And like, it basically does impact everyone. From sales calls, it's primarily been the executive level folks that won't buy GitLab for planning because of the current constraints.
I would
I think
that too. And I think, sorry, the people who need the information rolling up, the PMs, the executives, even though they may not have been the system administrator and set it up, they're the ones in the most pain trying to grok everything. Sorry, Alex, go ahead.
No, that
whoever.
was me. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
I think I agree with that, but I think that also kind of, and this probably is covered in one of the risks already, which is about confusing existing users who are used to a current model. If we're able to come up with this flexible model where anyone can do anything, by its nature, it becomes quite complex, right? There's like a million different ways to achieve the same thing. And I think we do run the risk of alienating users or making it harder to support the system, making it harder to debug and maintain the system. We've been having a conversation the last few days in Access about how sort of the inheritance permissions work. And it is fairly rigid at the moment, but it's simple by the fact that it works in one way. So therefore, I wouldn't say it's easy to explain to customers, but there is one way to explain it to customers. And I think by introducing all that flexibility, it does come with some complexity as well.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for going through that. I think that's really important to get out in the open on this kind of one view. I'm going to skip the jobs to be done because I think some of the jobs to be done will emerge from a solution generation or a solution proposal type of session that we're going to jump into now. And for that, like, we're really flexible here. I think there's quite a bit of space. We're looking at this whole area that is in my view right now. And so be kind to your neighbor, but definitely you could put screenshots in here. You could put links to issues. You could put note cards that just have 1 to 10 words, because in about 5 minutes, we're going to talk through each one anyway. So even if you just put a note card with 1 to 10 words, that's fine, because we're going to land on it and talk about it. And the time boxes are going to be a little more rigid in this portion. It's like 5 minutes to quietly generate and get your thoughts on the board, and then about 3 to 5 minutes per person to articulate and maybe even share your screen if you want to when we get into the sharing portion. So
I have a question. Are these activities from the user's perspective or activities for us to do in the working group?
I'm going to change this label to solution ideas. Thanks, Marcus. I'm bending the rules a bit. There we go. Oop. I thought I could lock it before somebody moved it.
Sorry, I moved it. Yeah.
That's okay. It's all good. Yeah, so again, this is really free form. Just, be kind to your neighbors. Don't use the whole space. If you're kind of uncertain, you could just pick a corner or pick a wall, and then we'll work inward. But you can put screenshots, note cards, links to issues. The note card could be like 1 to 10 words. You could put multiple ideas in here. And I'm going to set a timer. For 5 minutes. And in Mural, if you have a a website link in your clipboard and you just paste it onto this, it'll create a card for that link. If that makes sense. So you could copy the URL to an issue or whatever, and then just paste it on here and it'll generate a little card for you. You could also take screenshots of a portion of a screen and paste it on here. You can drag and drop files onto it. Almost any image file works, PDFs work. Go nuts. About a minute and a half left. And there's about 30 seconds left. If you feel like you're done, could you put a comment in Zoom and just say done? And then if you feel like you need more time, put in the comments more time. Yes, pencils up, everyone. I like that. Brings back some bad memories. of school. So if you need more time, it's okay. I'm happy to add like another, 2 or 3 minutes. We also could do another round. I think one of the benefits of this, of doing it time boxed, is if we each only take about 3 to 5 minutes to talk through a solution idea, then we can do another round and we end up seeing a kind of convergence in a round 2, and that would be really great to get to that today. So I'm going to be a bit of a bully about the time here and there. I apologize if I sound gruff. I'm also going to ask, I think I'm going to see Liam. I'm going to use yours as an example. And I'm basically going to draw, if everybody could watch what I'm doing, I'm going to select the objects and I'm going to right click and say organize into area. If you could do that with your pile and then put your name when the little title pops up. And that's okay if you missed that and you need to ask what just happened.
Yeah, how do I actually select? Like it just moves the border around if I...
Oh, okay. Let's see, let me follow you.
I had to shift click all the objects.
Oh, okay, that works, thanks.
Okay,
I
you can also just drag click.
Yeah, when I drag
Like
click, I move the board.
Really?
You go to trackpad, zoom settings in the bottom right, and go to trackpad to switch between the two.
Oh. Oh.
Oh.
Thanks,
What if
Kristen.
I don't have a trackpad? How do I...
You can hold shift. If you go to mouse view, you can
Oh,
hold
shift changes your input method. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Learning something new every day.
It's funny. I see zoom settings and I'm like, it supports Zoom video.
So wait, how do I do it? I select them and then what?
You can hold shift and drag and then you right click on the group of objects you've selected.
Right click.
And there's an option.
Oh, organize into an area.
Yep.
I see.
Exactly. Oh, was that yours, Melissa?
I entered that earlier. Maybe this was like a synchronization delay.
Oh, there you are. Okay. No, I was confused about. I saw the M. I don't know. I saw M and I
me
thought
too. Like when
Marcus.
Melissa typed, I saw Marcus show up, and then it got replaced by Melissa.
And if you want to make your house bigger, you can just drag the bottom right corner and make it bigger.
What happened to my
No.
stuff? Oh wait, it's still there. Why don't I see
You're right
it?
there.
That's weird.
Okay. How's everybody feeling so far? I know this can be tedious if it's if you're not used to Mural or used to a facilitator telling you what to do. Okay. I'm going to go alphabetically. So I think that, oh, one more thing. Does anyone need to drop within the next 45 minutes? Or, before the end of this? Do you have to leave before the end of this? Like in the next 15 minutes or anything?
I've got
hard stops.
I've got 15. I've got a hard stop in 15.
Who else has 15 left?
Me too. We have the knowledge group meeting. So me and Kristen and anybody else.
Okay. Let's start with the knowledge group then. Marcus, could you talk us through what you came up with?
Yeah, so this is pretty much from the engineering perspective. One is just allow sub-projects, so make projects hierarchical, like as a way to tackle this, I guess. And there's actually an issue that somebody opened before we opened our epic, which suggested this. And maybe this could be an approach, like basically make projects hierarchical and then at the end just replace groups with projects somehow.
Okay.
And then the other one would be like pick one feature that's only available on the project level and try to port it to the group level, but without duplication. And I'm not sure if that's actually possible, but it would just be like an experiment that might take a while, I guess. But like try basically the same we're doing like for group wikis right now, but like try to do it in a cleaner way. where it's not really coupled to either project or group, but like the namespace, for example.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions or feedback from Marcus? And again, there is a link to an epic on this note card, allow sub-projects. So I'll give people a moment to kind of digest, and then, yeah, if you have any questions for Marcus or any feedback, any concerns, if you love it. And I think, Marcus, I'm going to make a note here that you're proposing an experiment. And you mentioned, you know, you don't know how long it might take, but
Yeah, it's
how long would you typically give yourself, Marcus, for this type of experiment?
I mean, it would probably turn into an epic already with multiple issues. So maybe experiment is not the right word. It's more like a spike maybe or something. But probably at least a week, maybe. I don't know. It's tricky. Maybe it would also be good if maybe more than one person would work on it. And I think the goal should not be to actually get something mergeable, but just to explore how feasible this actually would be, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Again, any thoughts or feedback about that?
I've found that there's different cases depending on what you want to port to the group level. Yeah, it's kind of, there's various cases. I'm not sure. I like the idea of just taking a run at it, but I think there's various cases, so it would only apply to each specific case.
I was actually thinking about epics because they're like, they don't have a lot of dependencies to other stuff. Like something like that's tied to repository or containers or something would probably be much more tricky.
Okay. All right, and that was exactly 3 minutes. And then let's move to Kristen. I mean, obviously, you know, I want to point out too, anyone can come back to this board and make comments. Like the nice thing about this is it's asynchronous as well going forward. So, all right, Kristen.
Yeah, so I was kind of thinking along the same lines as Marcus, and I was trying to break it down into what is the smallest thing we could do that we could also verify and check to see if it works. And so what I ended up, I kind of had 2 areas. At the top, I was on the track of, there's 2 things I see. Like one is, let's have groups and projects behave the same ways, like similar settings, similar functionality on the namespace. And then the lower track, which I didn't get into, is let's create a new type of connection that allows entities to report to each other. So like one is the access side and like the rolling up, and the other is, I just said, duping settings between the 2. What I was thinking is potentially dupe all non-resource settings first, like look at the settings panel for a project in a group. The smallest thing we could do maybe is to have those be identical, other than like adding on resources like MRs or designs or things like that. And then move into kind of, as Marcus was saying, choose one thing, like either enabling integrations at group level or designs at group level, or something that we could bite off that's small. The first step with a resource would be the next. After we've got the dupe, then we would start tackling resources in an iterative way. I don't know if that makes sense. But I think that's kind of where I left it. It was just finding those 2 tracks. Like one is, I don't think duping is the right way to say it, but having projects and groups be the same. And then picking off resources one by one.
Excellent. Any feedback or questions for Kristen?
just a clarifying question. What do you mean by resources exactly? Like anything outside of the database that's tied to it?
Yeah, like I was just looking at the project settings for a group versus a project, and I noticed on projects, one of the first sections is merge requests. I probably should have like screenshotted that, but you're on settings on a project, there's a whole section on enabling merge requests. That would be a resource setting that I would say we wouldn't touch immediately, like moving MRs to the group level. But a setting like visibility or more like, I guess the more generic settings would be brought together so they're the same before we.
Okay. And again, you know, if you think of a question later, you can come back to this board and drop it in. Just if you do, you can I'm sharing my screen, but you know, you can say at Kristen, and then Kristen will get notified.
That's cool.
So, okie dokie. Okay, Marcus and Kristen, I appreciate you going first. Before we move on, so Marcus and Kristen have to drop very soon. Does anyone have any questions or feedback from Marcus or Kristen before we move on? Okay. Let's go to, yeah, thank you both. Yeah, obviously you can stick around until you have to drop, but let's see. Let's go to the top left here. Liam.
Perfect. Yeah, so some of my ideas were around simplifying groups and projects by making them backed by the same implementation. This is something we've spoken about in a bit of detail on already. So that implementation would probably be what we call namespaces at the moment, but we wouldn't necessarily reveal that term to users. Once you create this namespace, if it's a group or a project, you can easily add resources to that. When I say resources, I mean things such as wikis, issues, repositories even. And you can kind of like configure them as you wish, so you have complete control. Ideally, I guess you would probably want some sort of like wizard or template on creation, which helps you choose the correct resources for what it is you're trying to achieve. Are you trying to create a software project? Are you trying to create a support repository? You know, what are you doing? And therefore, it will just automatically give you like a base of what should be included. I also think that there'll be value in introducing the term teams, just to like make it clear to users the difference, or at least kind of like the theoretical difference between your project hierarchy and your like organizational team hierarchy. How that is implemented, I think, is an open question. That could also be backed by namespaces. It could be backed by the same things that groups and projects are. But ultimately, it would be a distinct term that I think users would know about to kind of like change the way that they think about our group hierarchy. And also, I think that I haven't heard like strong reasons so far like why our permissions hierarchy wouldn't remain the same as it does today in terms of its kind of top down. And I think where possible, I think it would be best to keep that because it simplifies a lot of things. Rather than kind of like having this matrix-based permission system where people can sort of see stuff across hierarchy. I think that starts to make things quite tricky. So yeah, there's some of my thoughts. I shared some of this. I've got a minute left. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do a quick screen share.
I'll add more time, Liam. Don't worry about it.
I can't share the screen while the other part, I think, might be.
Oh, I will stop sharing. There you go.
Perfect. Sketch. So I won't go into an immense amount of detail on this. I shared it in the channel before, and I think there was a good discussion with Gabe around this. But this is kind of like a basic idea of how things could look. So like the whole hierarchy is just based by everything being a namespace. We introduce the concept of teams, so you create your people as sort of teams and team members. Access is granted still via membership, and you can add teams as members to different areas. And you can basically decide, given what your namespace is, you can decide what you want switched on and switched off. So it might be for some reason, I don't know, you don't want issues in one particular area. It might be in another scenario, you do want issues to be enabled. In this case as well, I also show an example of how you can maybe like share a particular issue with like a user, like somebody outside your group. So it shows how maybe you can override how permissions works. But yeah, I'll probably stop with the detail at that point.
Okay. I think I put a link to the correct Slack conversation on your work area there. Would it be possible, Liam? Oh, actually, what I'll do is this. Okay, I'll stop blabbering. Does anyone have any questions or feedback for Liam? Was everyone already familiar with this solution and you don't have any questions? Or
I
are you
heard it
sort of
mentioned
taking it in?
before.
Sorry,
But
Marcus, go ahead.
I heard it mentioned before that you're thinking about Teams. I'm not sure if it was in the Epic or in one of the meetings.
What? And I have I think we talked about this extensively in Slack, but would Teams also, if they're backed by like a namespace, be able to have like their things that they're responsible for or the resources that they're interacting with show up within their team namespace?
Yeah, I think that was kind of like the open question, and I think that maybe is where you do need a bit of that sort of like matrix permission system, so you can see stuff across Sibling. I think that's something worth like drilling into more detail on. I think we also discussed that I think the introduction of teams isn't like an absolute hard requirement to make all of this work, because you can kind of introduce the same by just having a group at the moment, which is a list of members. I think just conceptually introducing that term simplifies things, and I think it will simplify users' understanding of how the system works. And I think there's value enough in that.
Yeah, I think my feedback is I think it's if it's all backed by the same thing, like a namespace, we can call different namespaces different things, so it's easier for the user to group like what's what. So yeah, I think it's awesome.
Yeah, and I ran into this very real issue last week that we now have the manage stage set up in GitLab, like via the organizational hierarchy, and I wanted to create an issue, and I spent about 2 minutes looking to see how I could create an issue in a group. Now I've used GitLab for 18 months, well, nearly 2 years, and that just wasn't intuitive to me immediately. And then I realized that I had to create a general discussion project so that we could actually start having a discussion as a team. So it's just like that you know, even after using a product for a long time, it's not intuitive at all.
Yep.
Let's see, we have a link to a Slack conversation, and we have a grab. I took a screen grab of your diagram. Are there any epics or issues related to this approach that we could also share in here?
I don't know if we have much by way of like the team setup, to be honest. I think there probably is some stuff. Well, there definitely is some stuff that Alex has been working on around some work to kind of like condense everything down to a namespace.
It might be a good, if it's okay with everyone, maybe a segue to Alex. Do you want to go, Alex?
Sure. Can you zoom in? I can't see that.
Sure.
Excellent. Thanks. So mine are sort of two ends of the same spectrum. One is that we aggregate projects and groups into one big entity in the same way that you sort of operate with jQuery, if anyone's familiar with jQuery, where in jQuery, everything is sort of a jQuery object. So you make a query, you call a method on this jQuery object and it just sends you back another jQuery object, and you just keep going, and you can chain calls really easily. And it's sort of in a similar sense, if we combine groups and projects, you kind of just get both of the features from groups and projects in the one sort of super blob. And on the other end of that spectrum is that we destruct groups and projects, where you take all those sort of resources off projects and you turn them into their own things, which I think is sort of similar in line with what Liam just went through. And you sort of toggle various bits and pieces on and off as you need them, and connect them up to the various sort of teams or groups as you need them. I think at the moment, the current architecture of groups and projects kind of is in this gray area where we sort of have features in some bits, sort of behaviors in projects that we want in groups, and behaviors of groups that we want in projects, and we kind of duplicate them, and we're kind of in between. I think that if we went one way or the other way, either aggregate everything or destruct everything, deconstruct everything, maybe we can have a chance of making progress, getting somewhere.
All right. And did you say, Alex, that this idea to destruct, to drop projects and decouple entities is similar to what Liam proposed?
Yeah, similar. But for me, it's, I guess Liam sort of has a specific solution there, whereas I'm sort of more general, just along that sort of that axis of aggregating versus destructing on the other end. Really, I'm sort of more general in that. I'm not exactly sure what shape that would take, but sort of just the general principle of taking the wikis off, taking the labels off, issues, merge requests, whatever else, and turning them into their own things. That for me is sort of the key bit of that card.
Okay. We have about a minute and a half left before we move to another proposal of solutions. Marcus, do you have any feedback on this approach?
I think Marcus has dropped.
Oh, did he? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right, because yes, Kristen and Marcus dropped. Huh. Okay, so I'll kind of, the reason I asked Marcus that is he proposed a sort of experiment method and exploration. Have we done an exploration on this concept, you know, either from where you're looking at it, Alex, or from where Liam's approaching it? Have we spiked on any of that yet?
I don't think so. I know that Marcus has started to port the wiki from projects into groups. I've got a conversation lined up with him next week. I think that it's sort of might lend some ideas as to whether we can sort of pull it out into its own thing. I think Marcus would have some opinions on that.
Okay.
So,
all right.
Alex, you're saying like in the back end, each of these resource things would be like a independent of groups and projects, and then you could just basically attach them to a namespace.
Yeah, that's right. So like a wiki's the most obvious for me. So a project has a wiki, but then a group could have a wiki, or a user could have a wiki, or there's a whole bunch of different
Mm-hmm.
purposes. And I think that's sort of a lot of that problem that we're finding where we want things to go from projects to groups. It's actually just this generic resource that can be pinned to anything. It just depends on the context. I think they are kind of standalone.
I think I completely agree with you there, by the way. I think something valuable as well would be to like come up with a common name for what we're going to call these things, like these resources and entities. So I guess we're basically talking about everything that isn't a namespace, right? So wikis, issues, merge requests. I think entities probably seems to work quite well. I think with resources, there's obviously many other meanings of that term that we probably already use.
Yeah, resources is pretty generic. I think just when I was looking at I am today from AWS, they use resources to sort of refer to what we're referring to resources as. Yeah, I mean, it sort of has to encompass so many different things that it kind of becomes so generic. Yeah, so just very quickly, as I went through the project model today and listed some things that I thought we could carve off into sort of that might be candidates. I didn't give much thought to this, but you know, so a project has a repository, issues, labels, milestones, iterations, notes, snippets, hooks, and designs, and much more. Those things kind of could fall into their own sort of standalone objects or resources, whatever you want to call it.
When you say they can fall into their own standalone objects, can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah. So a project, I don't really know what a project is. A project is kind of a aggregation of all those resources that sit underneath a project. But I think at one time a project would have just meant maybe a repository with some issues. It's kind of grown from there. So something like a repository, why do I need a project to have a repository? I just want various repositories. I want to add maybe some people to it that then they can commit or they can pull code. Liam and I discussed earlier, or he mentioned in this call actually that he wanted issues on a group, so group specific issues. You know, why do I need a project for an issue? I think the assumption at the time would have been that, well, a project has a repository because we're talking about code because it's GitLab, and then we want some issues associated with that repository. But we've kind of moved on from that point. Labels are used already in various places, and they're kind of just polymorphic by nature. You know, a label is kind of like a tag, I guess. You can use it in all sorts of contexts. Does that help at all?
And another example there, I know we've discussed this before, Alex, is how issues belong to projects, and they belong to projects because description templates come from the repository. So there's quite a lot of coupling between how an issue is related to a project, which has a repository, which might have some markdown files in it, which generate your issue descriptions. Now you can argue there's value in how that works, but if we start separating things out, I think we'd need to think about those details those things in a bit more detail.
For what it's worth, we already want to decouple those out and not have templates. I mean, because people want group level templates. They want epic templates. They want workflow templates. And like, there's an issue. I'll try to dig up somewhere and add to the comments about that. But yeah, I think it's wonky right now when I go into settings and like I want to set my insights for my top level group and I have to pick a project that's like way downstream because that's where the YAML file is. You know, like that's just, I don't know. It is unnecessary decoupling, I think, in a certain fashion. But
yeah, and I think that decision has very much probably been influenced by the setup that we have between the difference of a group and a project. And if we had that flexibility, probably a different decision would have been made.
Okay. All right, let's keep moving so everyone has been heard. Let's go to Melissa. You're up, Melissa.
So a lot of my stuff is the same things that Alex and Liam have been talking about. I actually think a lot of the complexity comes from just sort of using groups for a lot of different things, right? And when you do that, it sort of becomes complicated to explain and manage, right? Because a group is not just for one thing, it's for, you know, like 6, 7 different things today. So I think part of simplifying groups and projects is sort of pulling out pieces of functionality that groups serve today into their own kind of smaller object. And that kind of goes into a little bit of what Liam was saying, like teams for like permissions and people groupings, right? Having that be its own very small single purpose thing, right? Same thing with like a top level container, right? To kind of delineate what an org is, right? Having that be its own standalone thing that we use groups for today. And then once you do that, what you're left with for groups and projects is managing resources, right? Then you can make them very specialized for that, and basically making it so you can manage resources within groups and projects the same and stack them, right? If you want to for, you know, hierarchical purposes to display your org, whatever reason you want to do that for. And then basically being able to turn on and off certain parts of groups and projects if you want. And then I think that makes it a lot easier to understand what things are for, right? And I think it'll also help in just kind of like customers intuitively knowing what to do versus someone having to explain it, because you have more objects, but they're each smaller and more specialized, if that makes sense. And I included a link and a diagram that I already had it made, so I kind of cheated.
That's fine. Thanks. Okay, I'm seeing a pattern of this like deconstruct things. So that's good. Just want to call that out. There's a sort of convergence happening. Any questions for Melissa or feedback before we go to Gabe?
Let's say obviously we're in agreement there. It reminds me of another conversation I had, I think, with Gabe when I shared my diagram around like GitLab's take on small primitives. And I think generally that's a good concept, like using one thing or multi-purposing one thing to get as much value out of it as possible. Having said that, I think it gets to a point where it might do more harm than good. So like users' understanding of what a group is. If you then want to create kind of member management, you also have to create a group. Also kind of a group represents an entire company. It represents software projects. So I think identifying those areas where maybe those small primitives in the background could all still be those small primitives, which maybe are a namespace, but knowing the right areas where we need to say, hey, actually we need to call this out explicitly as something else to the customer, such as an organization or such as a team. I think it's quite important for simplicity.
Yeah, I think those are really easy wins as well. If we can just change some text in the UI and reuse the same engineering backend, they're big wins.
Is that sort of a solution proposal, Alex? Is to like first see what we can change on the UI and see if we can achieve this goal of familiarity, rather than trying to make some big refactoring on the back end? Is that kind of what you're proposing?
It might be part of the solution.
Part of
yeah,
it.
I think that teams, you could just sort of relabel groups as teams at the moment, and you'd sort of make a lot of progress. So you have groups and teams.
Yeah, and that issue, that's actually what we were debating, is like if, yeah, like if you could, right, use groups for team management, what would that look like, right? It's basically like turning off a bunch of things, relabeling some stuff. I'm probably
Yeah,
oversimplifying it, right? But at least starting with a proof of concept and seeing like what's left after you do that.
yeah, and I think perhaps a lot of that, at least the first step, just happens in the UI.
I think you can do a lot of that. I think you could do a lot of that, but only once you have the namespace and some things merged into a namespace, and then you can reuse the namespace and have like different UI things. Because I think part of the core problem is if you just use groups and you call those teams, you still have the team can't do issue management at the team level. Like kind of what Liam was saying, like you have to create a project just to hold issues, and then you still have the disconnect between like epics at the team level and issues at the project level, and like but I think once you put all the entities or resources in a single namespace, then you can use that namespace to have like a team's UI thing and a project management UI thing and an assets UI thing. So it's using the generic small primitive backend, and maybe like we're automatically turning some stuff off because it is a team. So we don't have to build anything special for teams because we already have the thing there, but without merging some stuff together or having a single namespace, it feels like just change the UI isn't going to fix the problem.
Yeah, I think part of the confusion comes from actually trying to work out a roadmap from where we are to where we want to be, and is I guess relabeling in the UI is sort of somewhere along that roadmap, perhaps. Definitely not the final solution, though.
That's interesting as well, because I said earlier that like Teams isn't a requirement in terms of like how things maybe work, like when you draw them out. But maybe like as a first iteration, it does make sense to focus more on that. As you said, Gabe, like it would be probably confusing if you just created a team right now and it looked exactly the same as a group and it was limited as a group is. But if you could if the first iteration was to create a team, which is backed by a namespace and has this new functionality that it has limited resources in it. So it only has, for example, members and issues. Maybe that's a sort of good first way to say, we now have this concept where we can create namespaces where we kind of like choose which entities can belong to it. And then over time, we start to use that logic to refactor out how groups and projects work to effectively represent the same thing.
Yeah, that could work.
Okay.
Do I hear agreement with people? Very exciting.
Yeah, I like that
magic
approach.
I heard someone say like a roadmap to get to where we want to be. Part of this, the solution generation, is to get ideas like the one that I think we just converged on. And it's actually, if somebody could write on a Post-it like what that convergence just was, that would be really helpful. What we want to do with these ideas is actually do what someone just mentioned, which is like create sort of a roadmap. Like first we do this so that then we can do this, and each step is an MVC. Want to get us to a point where we can do some prioritization by user value and level of effort. And so we would take these ideas, and we'd probably have to do some kind of voting, or like maybe generate some more Post-its and put them on here in an axis where we can talk about level of effort and user value. And ideally, we would prioritize the things like in the top left that have high user value, and over to the right, less effort. So less effort, high user value would be the higher priority things. But I think first, we need solution ideas that we agree on and can have a shared understanding about, like teams are people plus issues as an MVC. I think breaking that down into smaller steps and prioritizing would be a good next step. And I don't think we have time for that today, but I think now that we have this mural board, we have some some like continuity, I think, where we could theoretically do that next week and theoretically do it within the half hour that we usually have allocated for this. So, but before we go, I want to make sure everyone gets a voice and that Gabe gets a chance to talk through stuff too. And I apologize, Gabe, that we're like we're pushing it really hard, but
I can go really
Okay.
fast.
Okay.
I think it's kind of building on a lot of what we've talked about already, but it's like a configurable workspace that can be used to store any type of resource. Then we have one-click templates, basically, that let you configure your workspace based on use cases and use your use cases. Like, I want to use this for project management, and maybe it's like a little wizard that you answer a few questions, and then it sets up your workspace with all the resources that you would likely need. And then you can always go enable them if you want. I was suggesting doing that within namespace as well, because I did explore our GraphQL API a little bit and trying to solve another problem and realized that we had namespaces in there, we have groups, and we have projects, and like I just didn't understand why everything wasn't under a namespace to begin with. I thought that was really confusing. And then like the workspaces, like I kind of take a people first approach and believe that resources or entities should be structurable in an accessible way, just like people structure themselves and how businesses structure themselves. So like you could have a graph model, but also some inheritance properties. And if you click on that link to the right there, like I use this a lot in understanding I'm an organizational theory geek to a certain degree, and there's like 9, I think, primary organizational structures, the way that companies work. And if we think about being able to allow this namespace to be configured in a way that maps to these 9 and supports these 9 different organizational types, then we're sort of like, if it's flexible enough to be able to do that, then it's going to meet 100% of use cases, basically, or at least more than 80% of how people want to set up GitLab, and like allow them to create like this organizational structure for their people. And if you solve it for the people, then you're also naturally going to solve it for the other resources that you want to have, maybe like as a separate part of it or separate nodes. But I think it's important to also think about allowing things to trigger things in other namespaces. So like sort of like parent-child pipelines, like if I want to set something up, so in a namespace, I want to be able to trigger a workflow in a sub namespace 1 that then triggers workflow in a sub namespace 2. Like thinking about the flow of information and how different actions in different namespaces can more or less trigger things happening in other places, not just within like CI/CD, but also in like things like issue management or dependency management or whatever. So I think it's a good model when I think about how I want to organize namespaces and sub namespaces and have relationships. I think we should look to how companies organize themselves. So that's the path of least resistance, and they'll immediately be able to identify how to set up GitLab based on their organizational model too. So
that's really helpful article. I'm going to go back and read that in detail also. Do you think Liam's is sort of a hybrid, right, of what, teams and divisions, or would you characterize it in another way?
No, I think it is. I think as long as you have like the namespace can have things that are turned off and on, right? Because I could also see some teams are going to want to have their own repo. They might want to have their own pages. They might want to have like some of these different things within the team itself just for that team, right? And they might also have issues that they're working on for a product area that are part of that product. But just, I think that's why it's important to have the kind of graph model so that you can see things that, like, there is a single source of truth for everything that your team is working on, and like that is within your team, right? But also being able to surface that in the places where you're making these changes and making it so that other people can collaborate, I guess. But yeah, it's pretty close.
Any questions or feedback for Gabe?
I wonder if we could do some research with our customers of just which one of these they used, right? Of the 8, 7 types or whatever. just to know which cases we have to solve for first.
Awesome.
I also feel there might be value as a group in going through like some detailed scenarios of what Gabe just spoke about in terms of how matrix organizations expect this to work. Like as we've spoken about before, how people want maybe visibility from sibling groups in the hierarchy, and how whatever solution we're coming up with, how it will solve that problem.
Okay, I'm going to put that as the next step. Man, this seems like the size of the globe. All right, next step, possible next step. This isn't set in stone, but research with customers to see which type of org structure they generally follow. And in order to research this, do we have any assumptions that we can test around this idea really quick? Like, what type of org structure do we believe customers generally follow? Which one do you think we could support with an MVC? If you want to look at it that way too.
I would say that the hierarchical structure is the most dominant in large scale organizations. I think they might actually be, yeah. I know that that's the case. And then I think the matrix structure is probably second most.
I think we have hierarchical with the line managers and then matrix structure.
Yeah. Or, I mean, I'm not sure. I do know hierarchical is the most widely adopted organizational model out there.
Okay. Yeah, let's put a pin in that. Just because of time, not because it's unimportant. Okay, so we have a couple options for when we come back together. One is we could
Forget Justin either.
What's that?
I was saying just Justin put some stuff down and we shouldn't forget.
Oh, sorry.
Mine is mostly duplicative of what we've already discussed, so I'm excited that we're coalescing anyway. And I also put some comments in case people read async. But we can skip me. There's nothing of unique
I'm
value.
really sorry, Justin.
I would add by talking over these.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. It was just benign negligence on my part.
No, you're good.
And trying to rush. Sorry about that. It happens when we rush things. Okay. So one possible next step is to break this down and prioritize what we broke down. We could do that, and then we could also talk more about this path of validating types of org structures. This topic, talk about more about what type of org structures we want to support. I think maybe like offline, like maybe a small group of people could decide the next step, or we could talk about it in Slack. Yep.
Yeah, Mike, do you mind starting a Slack thread in our Slack channel? And
Sure.
We could sort that out. I think these can happen in parallel too. Like we can investigate this org structure piece independent of the breaking down the other experiments.
Cool. That's a great idea. All right. Again, sorry about the rush toward the end here. Thank you everybody for tolerating me and participating.
Mike, thanks for leading us through it. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks, Mike.
You bet. Thanks, everybody.
All right, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye.
You too.